Join me as we talk all things true crime.
Made contact and shattered.
Delivered to a missing 4-year-old. The parents have called in and thus that the mother had went for a walk, came home, now they can't find her, they've been yelling for her.
Turn it over to another agency. Let's get some help.
Where are your kids? They've been missing for 4 months. You have nothing to say? You're over here in Hawaii? Dad, where are Lori's kids?
4 were stabbed multiple times and were likely asleep during the attack. Some had defensive wounds.
Most of them had just like one that was the lethal stab wound.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to do a little sound check before I try to turn my camera on and see if both are working. And while I do that sound check and wait for the chat to let me know they can hear me loud and clear, I'm going to invite some friends. So I'm just going to send a link out to Riddler and Shay Benet, CDT, and Melissa Jade. They might be busy, but I figured I'll invite some friends and see what ends up taking place. So just give me a second to send them the link, and sounds like everyone's saying that the sound is good. So thank you so much for being here, guys. If you haven't hit like and subscribed, I'd be so happy if you could just do that for me at this moment. It's really all I ask of you guys, and I just appreciate you all being here. And let me just send these out. And hello to my chat while I send these. I see Pointer Lovers here, Mel Mac, Corey. You should have just gone to the game. Chris is here, and Delaney's here. Okay, so I sent one to Melissa Jade, sending one to CDT and Shay, and then emailing Riddler. And hello, Nikki Rex and Alice and Faye. It's good to see you guys. So I obviously want to talk about the updates in the Idaho case this week. The last 2 weeks, we've had live streams about the Gilgo Beach, aka Lisk, Long Island serial killer. But I just wanted to discuss this alibi information because I honestly find it very interesting. And I believe that the defense is using these court filings and just ways to spin their narrative and possibly do their best to cause reasonable doubt while the gag order stays in place. So I've sent out the invites to my friends. I'm going to turn my camera on and we can make sure that the visual is clear. But pretty much I just wanted to say that Bryan Kohbgerger is due back in court on August 18th. And pretty much to sum up my thoughts so far, you know, the defense does not have the burden to prove that Bryan Kohbgerger wasn't there at the house the time of the crime. So that, of course, the burden lies on the state to make it clear to the jury and not to leave any room for reasonable doubt. You know, the jury has to be made clear every step of how the prosecution is claiming that night went and where Bryan was at each second. All that needs to be laid out very well for the jury. And, you know, he has to be convicted 100% without any reasonable doubt. And that's just my thoughts. So I really hope that the state has means to prove that right now. And yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what takes place in the next, or if anything, that I'm not sure what the August 18th court appearance is about. Do you guys know? Oh, thank you, Nikki Rex, for your membership for 16 months. I really am appreciative of you guys being around so long, especially, you know, over a year or more, some of you guys. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate all my moderators and my members. So thank you so much. Let's see. I also put together some edited clips. It's around 3.5 minutes. And it's just like very small recaps of the case. And then also a pre-recording of just the alibi information that we got this week and some stuff that I clipped together there. So let me just play that for you guys too. And I'll just keep looking over my notes. Let me know if you guys can see me in a clear picture too, because I've got a cord that I'm using. Pointer Lover says, Bryan has no alibi. I take late night drives. Okay. Yeah, it's been a huge comedic relief in the true crime community this week for us to kind of hear his quote unquote alibi. So everyone's had a good giggle about it. And thank you so much, Babs Forever. I really appreciate that. She said, great channel, great content. Thank you. So how is the picture, guys? Because I don't want to leave my camera on if it's not clear. And hello, Julia and Hippie Chick. Okay, let me just add my edits, and I'll pause it when I need to expand on, any further comments or whatnot. Tumbleweed said the August 18th hearing is judge ruling on previous motions. Thank you so much for that. Hello, Carol freaking Claus. Okay, thank you, CEO. I'll get that figured out. All right, guys, let me add these edits. And then I have, actually, you know what? I did want to, just because of the name of the stream, New Night Stalker, I wanted to do like a little bit of recap of the original Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. So, because everyone knows that that's who originally owns that name. So Richard Ramirez, dubbed the Night Stalker, the walk-in killer, and the Valley Intruder, since his attacks were first clustered in the San Gabriel Valley, was an American serial killer and SO whose crime spree took place in California between June 1984 and August 1985. So, he was somebody that broke into homes, home intruders. So I just found that kind of an interesting element, especially with obviously the quote unquote alibi that's come out. And hello, MK, it's good to see you. And Eddie, hello. Him saying that he routinely goes on these night drives, us knowing that he was pulled over previously for that seatbelt violation at night near the home. It was around, I think, 11:30 at night. I mean, will it all play out? Like, is the defense basically saying that everything they have so far doesn't show, obviously, him walking into the house? Because their whole defense and alibi is, no, he was in the car. I don't know. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Please hit like and subscribe. And I want to know, and comment down below those on replay. What do you, does my image work good? Like if I'm in a small corner? What do you guys think of his defense that he was driving around? Like when you heard it, did you guys chuckle? Do you think he has a leg to stand on? Just curious what your guys' thoughts are there.
We believe we have our guy, the one that committed these murders.
Does that map mesh up with the timeline that you've been putting together?
Yeah, I'd say it's very close.
Does that frustrate you that it's close?
I do, but right now we're still trusting authorities that, it's not going to be 20 minutes here or 15 minutes here that's breaking this.
You have pulled video seeing the Uber driver dropping them off.
Yes.
You've checked your phone records. You know with
Yes.
timestamps what time they got home.
Yeah.
My sisters got home at 1:56. It wasn't 1:45. I know it might not seem significant, but when we're looking for camera, when we're looking for dash footage, when we're looking for any of those things, I do feel it is valuable. And they did get home at 1:56. It was not 1:45.
As we have more and more information, we're able to try and piece together what occurred. When we do that, we want to go out to the scene and see how that fits in. And so it wasn't really an evidence collection situation. It was purely a workspace situation. We wanted to make sure that we held the integrity of the investigation, which is important. And so we're not enlarging and retracting the crime scene per se. We know that the Moscow Police Department arrived on scene. They essentially saw what had occurred. They locked it down, and then additional resources came in. We have a lot of the best the best technology, the latest and greatest as far as training goes. So indeed, I believe in the integrity of this investigation.
We hope that they picked the right guy.
The strange thing about this case, though, is Kohbgerger can't say specifically when and where he was at the time of the murders. He can only say that I was on one of these routine drives in a car. So it's kind of sort of an alibi, but kind of sort of not an alibi.
Law and Crime Network host and public defender Bryan Buckmeyer says it's common for prosecutors to request alibi information from the defense ahead of trial.
So in a lot of states, Idaho included, the defense is obligated to give what's called an alibi notice. It's if there is an alibi where a defendant can say, I was at this place and at this time when a crime occurred at this place and this time, and therefore it could not have been me. Either it's through the defendant's own words, oftentimes corroborated with this witness, or this video can explain why I was not there.
Man accused of stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death late last year was on a long drive by himself around the time of the death. His defense attorney wrote in new court documents filed this week. Bryankohberger, the suspect in the killing of 4 University of Idaho students, claims he was out driving at the time of the stabbings, according to court filings, indicating the alibi he could rely on would come at trial. Mr. Kohbgerger has long had a habit of going for drives alone. Often he would go for drives at night, his attorney Ann Taylor wrote in the filing. He did so late on November 12th and into November 13th, 2022. In the latest filing in the case, Taylor said that the defense does not yet have witnesses to prove Kohbgerger's exact location at. Okay, so the reason why I kind of put this image on, which is an image from the PCA, is this is the moment where law enforcement is claiming that the PCA claims a roommate's data signifies the time of the murders. So it's just interesting how that's their statement, that they have like corroborated evidence that, you know, they have reason to believe that that's when it took place. And now over, you know, speed up a few months, and we have Bryan's defense team, and they're basically saying like, he was driving around at that time, and we can prove that, but we can't prove it right now, but we might be able to prove it if we can cross-examine some witnesses on the stand and use our expert witnesses on during the trial, and perhaps even have Bryan testify. So it's just very interesting that, you know, this, from what we know so far in the PCA, I'm sure they have other things to link, which the medical examiner will get into why they believe that the time of death was at this time, et cetera, and not that time, and this window of time, and use their expertise to say that. And then, you know, it's going to be up to the defense team to kind of argue like, no, that's not accurate. Our expert is telling us that, you know, his data shows him here and there, and like pretty much say like he wasn't there, he was driving. So it's just interesting that we can already see a split in like the documents. You know, they're saying like they believe that this is the time, and obviously they're going to be using DM's statement of her eyewitness description of Bryan, which I'm curious if you guys think the bushy eyebrows and athletically built but not muscular, you know, does that represent Bryan in your guys' mind? The time of the stabbings, but added that corroboration could come during the trial. Mr. Kohbgerger is not claiming to be at a specific location at a specific time, Taylor wrote. At this time, there is not a specific witness to say precisely where Mr. Kohbgerger was at each moment. Taylor wrote that supporting evidence may come from cross-examination of the state's witness or from experts for the defense team. All right, and then this information up here is just a refresher of the phone forensics that we have and the camera forensics. Now, I said earlier that the defense is going to say that, you know, he wasn't there, and they don't believe that they have, that the state has, through my glasses, that the state has camera of him entering the house. Like, yes, we have so far from what we know, and hello, Roxanne, it's good to see you. From what we know that some cameras picked his car up, right? But we don't know if a camera actually picked up somebody in, standing, walking, who looks like Bryan, right? I mean, so far we don't know that. So when this court filing is taking place and they're saying like he wasn't there at the house at this time, that leads me to think that there's no neighbor camera or anything that they've turned over so far that has shown somebody walking in. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm just curious, like, for them to sound so confident that he was out and about driving. Now, of course, he's going to use arguments like they're going to have somebody who is an expert on the black box of his Elantra go up there and say why they think that maybe the state's expert about the Elantra's status and black box might be wrong and how it's not as accurate as the state's expert is claiming. And it's just going to be like a back and forth thing, of course. But the whole burden, of course, comes down to the state. Will they be able to convince the jury that there is no room for doubt? You know what I mean? But so far, I'm like, they must not have somebody that has him walking on camera right now. What do you guys think? So hold on. Was my picture blurry when I have it in like this little window? Let me know. And I'm just reading notes anyways. So I wrote, do you think that Bryan Kohbgerger will have to testify? Does he need to go on the stand to clear the air and explain where he was and why he wasn't there? These filings pretty much mean to us that we can pretty much say that he wasn't the DoorDash driver. What do you guys think? Because there had been speculation that maybe he was the DoorDash driver. So I guess we can rule that out. And there was also speculation that, maybe he was at the house buying illicit drugs. There was speculation that maybe he was at the house because he was dating one of the victims possibly, or one of the roommates in the house. There's also been speculation that maybe he was just friends with them and they had hung out previously in that night, but he wasn't there at the time of the murders. So it seems like we can kind of rule all those things out, those situations out, because they're basically saying like, no, during the time that you guys are saying this crime took place, he was driving around, and we don't have the evidence to share that with you guys just right now, but we could have it in the future. So it's just kind of like their bare minimum alibi, just so that they could present it because they were being compelled to. So yeah, basically none of those things are going to be an argument that they're saying, and that they're basically flat out saying that he wasn't at the address at that night at that time, and they can cross-examine people and build their alibi at the trial. So, but at the same time, people have been wondering, why did you shut your phone off, So Derek, good to see you, says not the DoorDash driver. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to leave it on for right now. If it's good, if it's not good, you guys will let me know. And thank you, Rebecca, for your membership, 17 months. I'm so glad that we've been friends that long. I really am. I can't believe I've been on YouTube that long too. It just goes by so quick. So yeah, they're basically saying that as of right now, at this time, there's not a specific witness to say where Bryan was, but he does like to drive late at night and in early morning hours. But again, it goes back to my first thoughts in the beginning of the live stream. Like the burden is not on the defense, They can explain and kind of counter argument what the state is saying during the trial, but The state's the ones that have to show up with, this is what it was, and this is why. You have to convict him 100% without, and there is no reasonable doubt. So what do I want to do? Cindy says, I think he needs to give more explanation. There's going to be, he's going to have to expand a bit, I would say. What do I want to play? So there was this News Nation clip, but I don't want to play the whole thing. I found the last part interesting, though. So let me just play it on my end and make sure there's no ad that's going to pop up, and then I'll share my screen. So it is called Kohbgerger's defense. No specific witness can confirm alibi. Yeah, Allison, I think he did it too. I think again, I can't say 100% on both sides until everything's laid out in trial, but for the most part, yeah. From what we've seen, I don't see how there is this theory of corruption and stuff like that. And I get it. But when we have like multi-agencies in this case already, like this wasn't something like the Gilgo Beach murders where it was being handled by the small police department, and they literally told the FBI, like, no, we don't need your help, etc. And so they were internalizing this investigation themselves, hiding aspects of corruption. I'm sure you guys know all about that because it's just been everywhere, that case. And we dig into it too here. So we're going to get back into that also because they did identify one of the victims. And yeah, there's just a lot going on there too. But pretty much this case, Idaho, there was involvement right away with state, with federal, U.S. Marshals. Of course, that's federal still, but it's just hard for me to get on board 100% with that unless, they can lay it out at trial, which we'll see. Because mishandling of evidence and all that does take place. So I don't know.
Peter, on this case, I mean, is there anything that would have you worried at this point? Is there anything that stands out to where you would be saying, and again, there's a lot we don't know, but from just what we know, where you'd be telling your team, look, I think we've got an issue with this?
No, there was the one witness inside the home, a surviving roommate who supposedly had exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that could lend towards Kohbgerger's innocence. And that's why they wanted her to testify at the preliminary hearing.
And hello, Melissa, and everyone else who has joined us. If you haven't checked out Melissa Jade's channel, she's going to be covering the Watts case, which is, I know a lot of you guys found me because of the Watts case. So she's going to be going back through some of the case itself because it's a 5-year anniversary, believe it or not. So I'll be over on her channel and her chat and all that for that anniversary live stream. So
she didn't want to testify for various reasons. I think that was a fabrication in the press. I don't think she really has that kind of evidence that would clear Kohbgerger, but that's the only thing I've seen so far that if it did exist, that could create reasonable doubt. Otherwise, I think that they got this guy dead to rights.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Dave?
So this guy brings up something having to do with how they tried to get Bethany to testify at a preliminary hearing, which never took place because they did the secret grand jury route, which is the state's right 100% to. It's always on the state, and Crime Curious and anyone else who knows more about this stuff, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's always on the state and at their discretion whether they want to do a secret grand jury or whether they want to do like a preliminary hearing. So when this took place, I don't know if it threw the defense off because they had a strategy where they were going to go in and question BF at the prelim, and it just didn't work out that way. So it kind of threw them off their game possibly, or maybe that was going to be their reason to kind of cause reasonable doubt very early on. But even so, it's just interesting how this guy is saying, this expert's saying something along the lines of Bethany and whatever she may have, which they used may. Yeah, exactly, Derek. 5 years and no NK. Wow, she's good. Yeah. Very frustrating. And yes, thank you, Melmac and my mods for sharing her channel. But basically, you know, whatever was going to be cross-examined with Bethany at that prelim, you know, we all want to know. We all want to know what exculpatory evidence she may have, just like we all want to know that 911 call.
What about the 3 unknown male DNA profiles at the scene? What about the fact that it was a party house? What about the fact that 8 hours later the police were called and the house was clean? What about the fact that there was?
Well, you say it was a party house. Wouldn't that explain all the DNA though? There's probably all sorts of DNA profiles there. His DNA was on the knife sheath.
But that's touch DNA, so that's problematic. Dave knows that. And then there was the one-legged situation with the one latent footprint. I mean, what is that? Like, was somebody?
And interesting enough, people have argued already, like, okay, so this touch DNA, blah, 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 it doesn't mean as much as they are making it seem it means. And, you know, experts have said, well, people aren't being convicted or just arrested for just the touch DNA. It's an accumulation of a bunch of stuff that, you know, allows for the arrest to take place. So the problem is hello, thank you for joining.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you tonight? Thanks for joining.
I'm good, thanks for having me.
So I was just basically saying that it's interesting that he's using this alibi of like, no, I wasn't at the house during the time of the crime. I was out driving, which is routine for me. And yet not only is his touch DNA found in the house, but it's found under the victim. Like, it's not, I feel like people try to write it off. Like, and I actually heard Shay say, like, I want to discuss this case without even having the touch DNA, like, in our conversations sometimes, because people are so like, oh, it's junk science. It's not anything to arrest on. And then other people are very much like, what do you mean? Like, this means this, like, it takes this amount of skin cells for it to come back as a match. Like, that's what it is. You know, this sheath wasn't just laying on a shelf at the house, you know, it's laying under one of the victims. And so it's just interesting, their alibi, because it's like, but how do you explain, you know, everything that took place that night and then your touch DNA underneath the victim?
Well, and that's a great point, because I've heard a lot of people since these alibi documents have come out that, well, I've gone for drives many times, you know, like, I didn't know driving meant that you committed a quadruple homicide. Well, it doesn't, right? That's why you have to look at everything collectively. And we only have little pieces so far, so we have no idea how much they have, but let's just go off of what we know they have so far. We know that they have, basically, in my interpretation of that document, it's saying that, yeah, there's a good likelihood that you do have his vehicle caught on camera, because as stated in the PCA, they see this suspect vehicle 1 doing all these maneuvers. So to me, that's acknowledging that that very well may be his vehicle. And then you have his phone doing, I'm going to say unusual, but it's important to establish a pattern of behavior. Was it unusual for this night for it to be disconnected from the network? And then you have that, and then you have the DNA on the sheath. So people look at it like, oh, well, you know, driving around isn't enough. No, you're right. Driving around isn't enough. You have to show all of the pieces together, which paint a bigger picture.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's the other thing too is we need someone to almost go on his drive that they've shown and mapped us out in the PCA And because people have argued and said, like, well, they're assuming he shut his phone off during the crime. We don't actually know that, like, maybe it just wasn't getting service, right? Like, isn't that an argument now?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I had people come at me and they're like, he didn't shut his phone off. And granted, that is correct. We do not know if he shut his phone off. What we know, though, is that there was only a few options. The few options is that it's not an area that can connect to a tower, that it went on airplane mode, or that he shut it off. I'm sure they'll be able to determine whether it was a conscious action to disconnect from the network versus something that happened naturally. But again, because I think that the documents also is trying to account for the 12 other times he's been pinging in that area, because I've seen a lot of people go with that too. Well, yeah, it wasn't unusual for him to go for these drives, right? If he pinged in the area 12 other times. I think that really establishes that he was on the hunt and he was observing. So the question is, out of those 12 times prior, did he ever once disconnect from the network, or was this unusual?
Yeah, like not only are they going to have their expert on like the black box in the car and their cell phone expert and like the tower expert or whatever, they're going to have to basically, like you said, just explain every little detail in a way that the jury doesn't have to wonder. And the information in the PCA is from CAST, isn't it?
Yeah, it says that it had CAST on, so I'm not sure if the information itself is from CAST or further information, but we do know CAST is on the case, and and that's what I really hope they pull, like some Alex Cox type of deal where they're able to determine exactly where he is. But with Alex Cox, his phone was on. I don't know how it works if your phone is disconnected from the network.
Yeah, see, that's the thing that's where I was going is I'm like, they're able to do it so precise. Like, it's not like, oh, this is just the tower that the cell phone company is saying you got service from, like on your bill or whatever. Like, you know how some, like when we pulled up NK's phone data and stuff, it like showed that she pinged at this one tower at this time, like, and everyone was like, that's not like that wasn't CAST basically. And it wasn't. CAST is way more precise. Like the Alex Cox and Murdoch case, like you were able to see, and they'll do it in this case too, you know, but at the same time, we have a phone that is allegedly on airplane mode or off. Whereas I think even in the Murdoch case, it was, they had just shut it off, or they had it on. Like, so it will be interesting, like what kind of technology they have to pinpoint it, like we've seen in those two other cases, because they're going to need to show the jury that.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm interested to see, I'm interested to see how close did he get? Like, imagine if they're able to put him like right at that house, that would be gold.
Yeah. And I don't know if you heard me saying earlier, like this makes me feel like they don't have like a neighbor's camera that caught like a silhouette that you're like, oh, that's him.
Well, we know that they have something in frame that's in front of 1122 because they're able to see the maneuvers that are done, the unsuccessful parking attempt. And so far, it's unclear what camera caught that, even though I heard someone say on my panel who speaks to the people in the area, they said that it was actually 1112's home, one of those back windows that's a bedroom that has a camera inside facing out. Now, I can't verify that. I don't know how credible it is. It's just something I heard. But even if they have a clear shot of in front of 1122, where he was parked, which we don't know yet, but in my theory, I think he was parked in the back of like that 500 Queen Road apartment loop, because it's right back, you could jump right to the back balcony from there. And so even if they did have a shot straight on of the house in the dark like that far pushed back in black, I can't imagine. Maybe you could see a figure walking, but you can't identify who the figure would be, in my opinion.
Right. And to get 12 jurors to all see what you're trying to explain is being seen, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But I just thought it was interesting also in this alibi filing, it says, at this time, there is not a specific witness to say where Bryan Kohbgerger was in those hours. He was out late night and into the early morning hours. And it's interesting because it's like, well, we actually have a witness that the state, I mean, for the PCA is claiming saw Bryan there. I mean, that was something.
That's a great point.
Because like I was like thinking like, well, he got like arrested based on a witness. And then, but at the same time in the filing, it also said something like, not verbatim, but we could, expand on this alibi further at the trial with cross-examinations of the state's witnesses. So I'm like, okay, so it's like the defense is saying, no, that's not who Dylan saw. It's not Bryan. And also saying like, but at the same time saying like, we can cross-examine the state's witnesses and prove our alibi as he was out driving. That's where I'm like confused.
It doesn't make sense. It just seems and it appears like they're throwing poop at the wall and seeing what sticks. And basically we're waiting for somebody to get on the stand and say something that'll allow us this opportunity to poke enough of a hole of reasonable doubt in it. That's what it seems like. So I don't think they're going to go to prove it wasn't Bryan that Dylan saw versus you can't prove it was Bryan, was Bryan that you saw, if that makes sense. Yes. You can't prove that it wasn't, but you also can't prove that it was.
Yes. And I think I forgot to thank Delaney who bought membership. So thank you so much and welcome to the members. And yeah, that's a good point. They don't need to cross-examine a witness to say all they have to pretty much is like make them question, but that almost means that they're going to need Bryan to come up and testify too. What do you think? Like people are saying, will he or will he not need to? And it's looking iffy, but at the same time, it seems like they've kept it as like he might testify or we might just have experts or cross-examine your witnesses. So it's like they're leaving it up as like an option.
Yeah. I mean, look what they did the same thing with Letitia Stout, right? We didn't find out till real time. Are you going to be testified? They're like, ask me tomorrow type of deal. We'll talk to you after Dorothy Lewis type of deal. I think it's solely going to depend on how prosecution's witnesses go. If Anne sees a reason to put Bryan up on that stand, she will, but I think that she's going to try to avoid it if she does not have to, because in my opinion, everything leans towards Bryan being the killer. And so I can't imagine what purpose it would serve to have Bryan up on that stand. If he does not have any witnesses, he won't even agree to a place or time he was at. Like, yes, I was driving around for this huge time gap, but I'm also not going to say I was at any specific place at any specific time. There's absolutely no witnesses. Well, then what purpose can Bryan serve on that stand?
Yeah. And it's like, you have the right to remain silent, but you also are given the right to testify if you want to. Like, if you're, obviously you'd have to be competent if you're at trial. And thank you, Riddler. I've seen people thanking you for the membership gifts. So thank you and welcome to the new members. And also it's like in the Murdaugh trial, their defense attorney basically said after everything was said and done, like that was their last hope. Like that was their Hail Mary, like putting him up there. And honestly, I think it was a huge mistake because I don't know if you know the trial at all, but he's just so arrogant and thought that like he could fool the jury. And it came off that way, like very like obvious in my opinion and to a lot of the jurors. So it worries me that the way that like Bryan appears, and again, I'm just going by the traffic stop with the female. It's like, what if he came across as like a know-it-all or something that would rub the jury in a way that like, okay, like, I don't know. Again, if he did this, and I would be happy that he would fumble up on the stand like I was about Murdaugh, because by the time he went up there, it was like you just knew, like you'd seen the Snapchat data and everything was just laid out, his movements in the car, which would be like that in the Kohbgerger trial. Like you would have the movement for his vehicle and all that, the Elantra. So it's just, I don't know.
I don't think people, like a lot of people, just basing off what I've seen so far, you have to trust that, like, listen, corruption occurs, cover-ups occurs. But with the PCA, I see so many people saying, well, I don't think I've seen enough to convict him or sentence him to death. You're not supposed to. The PCA is a tiny little portion. Right now, they're just words on the paper. But come trial, they need to back all of that up. And it's going to be backed up into such immense detail. They're going to have those witnesses, thorough witnesses on the stand going through every little piece, you know? And so I feel like people need to prepare for that, because I just see so many people are like, nope, that's not enough. And it's not supposed to be enough. It's just supposed to be enough to get the arrest, not enough to secure a conviction.
Yeah, that is so loose. The PCA is so loose compared to evidence they're going to allow in the trial even, right? Probably. Like whatever video footage and all this stuff that they're going through and like deciding like what the judge will allow and all that, like it's going through a very tight process. So that's a good thing, you know? And the PCA, like you said, like it's just to solidify an arrest. Now it's up to the state to say, this is the right guy. The moment we arrested him, we were right, etc. Let me play this clip because this lady's face on pause is killing me because she's such a pretty lady and I like did not do her justice for like the last 10 minutes. So hold on.
Go for it.
Hopping around. I mean, I see a lot of problems, but those problems can be a wash as we look.
Okay, so she's a defense attorney and she's saying what's with this one footprint outside this room, and you know, she's making jokes about it, of course, like was he hopping around? Like legit question though. I mean, like why was there only one?
Well, I would like to know that too, because, you know, there are issues that I do have with the PCA, or just the information that we know or the lack of information that we know. And one of those things are that latent shoe print that was noticed the second time around. And does that mean that there isn't others? But if they had something more solid, wouldn't they have put that in there? So I'm curious about that latent shoe print too. Why was it only one? Was it put in the PCA because it corroborates Dylan's testimony? I'm not sure.
Right. It basically was like there to lay out the path of travel, which I'm going to pull up. I have like little clips that kind of, I got more stuff to share too. I know you and me just love to gab too. So that's the thing, is we could go on and on, I think.
Who, us? No, not at all.
But some have speculated that it only showed up the second processing because it was cleaned. What do you think about that?
I think that that's a great concern, but I'm not educated enough to know if that is something that would be possible, or if it's possible that no, there's another reason. Maybe it's just not enough. Maybe because we know that there are many things that our human naked eye cannot see. So is it possible that it only showed up because it's too tiny for our human eyes to notice, and it has to be used with I don't know. I'm not educated enough on that specific, you know, blood analysis and luminol and all that stuff to determine or say one way or the other.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's been spoken about as like a fact. Like, no, it was cleaned and then they sprayed the chemical and it showed up. And it's like, that could be it. But like, we can't say that that's 100% what it is. So Derek said, I hope this trial starts on time. I need answers. And that's the thing, is I'm having, and I know that there's legal experts that have also said that something about like in this filing for the alibi, like they were putting a lot of blame on like delays and stuff like that on the state, like basically saying like, well, because you're not turning stuff over, we're not ready to do XYZ yet. You know what I mean? Like they're like, say they weren't ready to give a full alibi because they were saying like, well, we didn't get to do the prelim. So now we aren't set up to give you the evidence or state his alibi thoroughly because of what you did. You know what I mean? So it's like,
which is an issue in itself. Don't you feel like?
It is, because it's like, what do you have? Just turn it over. Or like, if it has to do with lab work and stuff, I find that very hard to believe with FBI and, you know, all the agencies and manpower and the budget and all that they had put in and taken for this case. It seems like the lab stuff shouldn't be anything but at the same time, I don't know what it's like to process a vehicle and do the black box data and everything that they have to do. I don't know, but it seems like they're going to try and say like, well, we're not ready for trial. And they're going to blame the state for the delays. And then they're going to try and say like, this impeded a fair trial for it to be, you know, his speedy trial timeline, because there's only like X amount of time. I don't know. I just think it's probably won't work, but they're going to try and say it's the state's fault that he's not getting like going to fall into this like speedy trial time.
Well, and the documents already implied that, even with the alibi documents, you know, it was like that one, right? We would have preferred a preliminary where we could have got this information prior. And it feels like with the IGG information and everything like that, you're forcing us to opt out of a speedy trial.
Yeah, which is like against his rights pretty much, because he filed for a speedy trial, right?
Yep.
So I don't know if that's something, I mean, I'm sure the defense will try and say like, we're not ready and it's your guys' fault. But I'm like, I just don't know if like a judge would abide, or at the same time, it would look bad on the judge if it was impeded his right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm really curious, because then also though you have Ann Taylor, who said that she doesn't believe the state is withholding anything. And I feel like people need to focus on that too, because they're like, prosecution state's not handing over everything. Well, Ann said, you know, that they're not withholding anything, but at the same time, yes, like I'm just curious what's going to happen with that IGG information. I'm really curious about it.
I am too, because the state had argued that like they haven't handed it over in other cases, where it's like at this point, because of the gag order, I believe the defense has been using these motions to cause reasonable doubt, like while not breaking the gag order, like saying there's a lack thereof DNA in the
placed.
Car. Yeah, and placed. Good call. Yeah. And thank you, Pickle Me Elmo, for the super sticker. I appreciate that. And hello, CDT. It's good to see you. So it's like they've been using these filings to cause the reasonable doubt that because they're not allowed to go on. Like remember during, I don't know, you were young. I don't know. We're both millennials. I know that, but I was like in my teens when Scott Peterson was going on. And I just remember like, you know, his defense lawyer was on, you know, Nancy Grace and stuff like that, like out there, like before he was even at trial. And it's just interesting to look at this case, which is huge in the media, you know, fast forward X amount of years, and this gag order, it's just, now it's being, the defense has gotten to the point where they can use these filings to kind of cause this hype and this hysteria and everyone to interpret it. And then like, because we even have like court TV and Law and Crime saying like, well, we don't know that for sure. Oh, CDT, your picture's so pretty. We don't know that for sure. This is just speculation, etc. And it's like, it's just interesting that we don't have the defense attorney out on the mainstream media saying like, no, this is our alibi. And we feel
that's a great point.
The state hasn't given us everything in the amount of time that we've asked. But instead, they're still getting their message out with the filings. So it's just been very interesting to kind of decipher and go through. And I really love your take on, you know, all the documents that have been going through. I watched so many other people's interpretations as well on everything that's been coming out. And then I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm ready to discuss it, because it can be like complex.
Very complex, but it's good to get I like hearing other people's arguments, you know, and I like hearing other people's take on it. But a lot of people just like, okay, it's the defense's job to do wordplay, and just like you said, it's like they're sending a message through these documents, and it's not lying. Like, even with the total lack of DNA, I'm really curious to know, is that synonymous with none? And I know a lot of people will say yes, it's total lack of, but you know, it's legal terminology. It could mean total lack of, dependent on what she has received so far. Like, you know, there could be like little loopholes that they do. And
yeah.
I just want to know, because everyone's like, she can't lie, she would be disbarred. And I'm like, I'm not saying she's lying, you know, versus they play, that's their job, to do word salad, to make people have that reasonable doubt, and it's working like a charm. If that's what she's doing, it's working like a charm. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, and it's like like you said, they'll use specific verbiage that kind of leave the door open to being like, well, it could be or it couldn't be. Like they may have exculpatory evidence. Everyone understands it too, but they do that too in interviews on TV. But I feel like when they're on TV, it like goes over people's heads more. Whereas like when we're reading these documents and we see it written out, I don't know. I just feel like it's been so helpful in a way.
Well, yeah. And also when they're on TV, you can see them, you could hear them, you could read their body language. With it being written on documents, it's up to you how you perceive them. And I've come across this issue with the 2 unknown male DNAs, because I've had debates with people about it over 2 unknown male DNAs within the home where the victims were found. A lot of people take that literally where the victims were found. I take that as possibly meaning it's within the home, and within the home is where the victims were found. So what do you think about that?
Repeat it one more time.
Okay, so in the document, it said that there were 2 unknown male sources of DNA.
Okay, yes.
Within the home where the victims were found.
Yeah.
A lot of people take that as literally where the victims were found. There's 2 unknown sources of male DNA. I think that there's a possibility it's within the home, and within the home is where the victims were found. So it could be anywhere within the home.
Mm-hmm. That's how I saw it too. Like, I didn't understand how people were. I had to go back through it because I was saying, wait, what? People are stating that it was like next to their bodies or whatever. So I like went back through and I was like, wait a minute. No, it just says unknown 2 male in the home with like whatever it said. It wasn't how people were interpreting it or misquoting it in a way. And it's like, let's read it how it is. And it's very broad, whether it means, no, actually it was in the room, that'll come out.
Maybe. It could mean either or. That's the whole point. And that's what I mean by like they play like little word games where it could be true in multiple senses. It's kind of how you perceive it written in that document.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's good to like hear everyone's take on it, on things, as long as they're being respectful of like the victims and all that.
Learn more in this case. If there's more evidence that's reliable, that will withstand the testing in court, then I think we can have a better conversation. But right now I see a lot of problems. I see a lot of holes.
Well, I think it's a good point you make that we don't have a lot of the information. So it's hard. You can only discuss this so far without knowing everything that they know. Sarah Azari, Dave Ehrenberg, you both.
All right. So let me just, and I don't know if you saw, well, pretty much this title, The Night Stalker, like questioning it, obviously came from his creepy alibi that he likes to take nighttime, drives. Not saying that people who take night drives are creepy. I'm just saying it's just very interesting that of all nights he goes on this cruise or whatever, But people have speculated that since he studied under the professor that was basically wrote the biography of BTK and is still in contact with him, Dennis Rader. People have speculated also about the similarities with that, like, and also Bundy, because Bundy went to the sorority house. I know this wasn't a sorority house, but obviously there were girls that were in sororities in it. People have just used these speculations. So the fact that, Richard Ramirez is like known as like a home invader, which is sort of, we have a burglary charge. We have like him entering the back door, they're alleging. It's just interesting that, is it something to do like with his fascination with these killers, or is it just by coincidence that we're like seeing similarities?
I think that's a great point. And yes, you can see things when you want to see them, but with this case particularly, he has a lot of connections and patterns as very popular serial killers throughout history. So I think that in regards to this case, there's more similarities than usual.
I agree. It's just, It's eerie that, there is evidence of him studying with that professor specifically. Like, whether it's just coincidence, I don't know. It's just kind of eerie so far. But this I wanted to play, and it's not the whole thing. But it was from Court TV segment the other day. I think that it's a good refresh of the timeline, like as far as his phone data and all that. So I just wanted to document that, and I'll play this 1 second.
Cause affidavit in the case against the accused killer of 4 University of Idaho students pieces together the movements of the suspect vehicle and coordinating cell phone location data beginning in the early morning hours of November 13th. At 2:42 a.m., the affidavit alleges that Bryan Kohbgerger's phone places him likely at his apartment on the WSU campus, where he was a PhD student studying and teaching criminology. At 2:44 a.m., Kohbgerger's vehicle and cell phone are on the move. Police say his white Hyundai Elantra is spotted on WSU surveillance cameras traveling north on Nevada Street at Stadium Way. According to the affidavit, it was here in this area of the WSU campus where surveillance video and Kohbgerger's cell phone placed him here around 2:47 a.m. According to the affidavit, he spent several minutes in this area where he allegedly turned off his cell phone before heading out of town toward Moscow, Idaho. By 2:53 a.m., Kohbgerger's white Hyundai Elantra is observed heading in the direction of Moscow, Idaho. At 3:26 a.m., the affidavit then places Kohbgerger's vehicle, now in the town of Moscow, in this residential neighborhood on Indian Hills Drive. This happens to be a road directly overlooking the Moscow Police Department. The Elantra is picked up on surveillance video moving west past the 700 block of Indian Hills.
See, I never knew that it was facing the police department on that one road.
I didn't until recently either.
Whether that means something or not, we don't know. But the fact that he was a criminology major, maybe he was seeing if it was a slow night, or if they were out and about. I don't know. But if he had driven by this area for a while, you would know, to look there and see. Cop cars stand out, you know what I mean? Like, especially at a station. So it does make me curious if he purposely rode by to check out what was going on there, or if that's just convenient.
Well, absolutely. And if he had gone there 12 times prior, would he have been familiar around that time how many cars would be in the parking lot, so he would get a good idea of how many cars were out patrolling?
That's true. And I've even heard people state that they believe he listened to scanners and stuff like that. Have you heard people speculate that? And it kind of makes me think so, with him talking about the shooting during one of his pullovers.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, I'm curious to know if his entire purpose of moving to Washington was to commit these murders. And I've been speculating that from the very beginning when we found out that he was studying underneath this professor. But I get hung up when it says no connection to any of the victims. Well, does that mean the 4 victims who died? Maybe is there a connection to Dylan or Bethany? But if he moved there with the purpose to kill, was it random, or did he have his eyes set on these victims already? But then I would anticipate seeing some type of social media connection. I don't know. It's so hard.
It's so hard because we don't know the motive, really. And it's not, usually you see it explained in the media, which is so convenient for this gag order, because it's like you don't have either side going out there spouting, like it was in, for instance, the Peterson case. Scott Peterson was cheating, so that's why he did this. You know what I mean? Like, you had the defense, or you had the prosecution, with Amber Fry up there saying like, our witness here will say so. Whereas like now we have these witnesses that have been kept under the radar and very much protected for what they've seen and all that. And it's just been very different. It's interesting to see a case like this magnitude with this gag order. And wasn't there one in Lori as well? I feel like they put a gag order also in that one, but we got a preliminary hearing, and that was like preliminary. Yeah, exactly. And we had gotten in police interviews and all that body cam footage, like so much. And then I think they slapped it with, and chat can correct me if I'm wrong, I think they did slap it with like a gag order too. But it's just the magnitude of this case, and knowing that the witnesses could have, very interesting information on what took place that night. I'm not going to say that they do have the exculpatory evidence 100%, but it is interesting that, we didn't get to see a preliminary, or the defense didn't get their chance to kind of cross-examine and give us more about this. Like, well, he goes on night drives, and now it's going to be up to their experts to say, like, we have a pattern. This is the pattern. I'm wondering if they're even going to use that pullover that he got with the seatbelt violation whenever we get to see that body cam footage, to be like, see, he was out driving that night. And that's the other thing too, which is kind of contradictory, is he was pulled over at night for a seatbelt violation, which is interesting because, like, how do you see 100% that someone's not wearing one? But besides that, it's like, if he does these routine drives at night, like they're saying, why wouldn't he have been wearing a seatbelt? It's kind of like, you do that when you're a driver and you drive all the time. Like, I don't care who you are, like, you're buckling up. Even Floridians buckle up.
Well, even they left such a huge window of time also with him driving. They're like, hey, basically anywhere within this 18-hour period, it seems like, yeah, he may have been driving. But what's more interesting to me is, okay, if he really was just driving, you're telling me he had no idea because if you're driving for that long, you're covering a good amount of space, in my opinion. You're not just circling the same blocks. So you're telling me you cannot tell specifically, even generally, any area that you may have been in. Oh, like, I stopped at the 7-Eleven around this time, and then go and grab the footage from there. Or I was more in this town, this area around this time. They didn't give any specifics, which is very telling. If you really want us to believe he was just out driving, you would have an idea of where.
Right. And I've seen also in the filings, they said something like, well, we can't say where at this time, or something about the specifics of like his location even. Yeah. But they might be able to in the future. And I seen Daniel from Drunk Turkey say in chat that something along the lines of like the poll or the WSU, or I'm sorry, the students that were during that, the cops are at that field, and basically saying like, perhaps, he'd seen him maybe, or that thing going on and whatever, maybe he was tracking like the movements of police that night. I think that that's very likely, but at the same time, if we're going to say that he goes on these night routines, so we're going to say because those cops were right there, like near their house, like dealing with those kids that were drunk in the field. So why would Bryan, who's been circling the area like 3-4 times, why would he continue to drive around an area? Because people are saying he's on camera, you know what I mean? And this isn't saying that's not his car on camera in a way, you know what I mean? It's almost saying like,
almost saying it is. Yeah. Like, oh, it wouldn't surprise us that his car is on camera because, our client was just driving around twiddling his thumbs.
Yeah.
Right. But we can't tell you where specifically he was. So if you happen to prove that it was his vehicle at this place at this time, we're not denying it, but we're also not going to say it was him either. Like, yeah, okay, I got you.
Yeah. And if he possibly could have seen cops and their lights right ahead, like, why would he continue to hang out in that area if he's going on these night drives, especially after being pulled over, like, in August for that seatbelt thing? Like, you would think he would think, I need to stay away from like that area. Like, the cops are like already on my butt because I got pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt. Like, you would think you avoid places where you've been pulled over, like for something like that. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't live in the area. You're still muted. I don't know if you want me to just play the clip.
At 3:28 a.m., video shows the vehicle on Steiner Avenue at Highway 95 as it made its way towards the King Road neighborhood where the victims lived. Then from 3:29 a.m. to 4:20 a.m., the suspect vehicle, the white Honda Elantra, is observed multiple times on video passing by 1122 King Road during the alleged time of the murders before being seen on video speeding away on Walenta Drive. The probable cause affidavit states that the car likely exited the neighborhood at Palouse River Drive and Conestoga Drive, a road that eventually leads to Pullman, Washington. About 2 hours after he allegedly turned off his cell phone, police say Kohbgerger turned it back on here near Blaine, Idaho. It's about 10 to 15 minutes south of Moscow, a rural community off Highway 95, and it has its own cell tower.
See, that's interesting that she says it's a rural area. It does have its own cell tower, so that would explain why, you know, it's able to track him there, like once he turns his phone on. But it's just interesting that, like, where else has a cell tower prior to him turning his phone on where it could have pinged? Because people are arguing that, like, it wasn't having any activity because there was no service. So now we need to just go back through and see what areas have service and whatnot. Like, before he gets to this moment in this road where he turns his cell phone back on, and luckily it does have a tower nearby. What places prior to that has a tower, and what way could they show that he has this pattern previously?
Right. And because he shut off his phone between 5:30 to 8:30 that same day. So that's why I'm really curious, how abnormal was it for his phone to be disconnecting from the networks? Like, if his phone hadn't disconnected at all prior, and this is just so like out of the ordinary, that's going to be very telling.
Yeah. And whatever cell phone data expert that the prosecution is going to put up on the stand to say, you know, and I'm assuming it's going to be someone from CAST who is going to say, like, well, this is what we have. This is his movements. And maybe even like the car data will show more detail or maybe less detail. We don't know yet. But his defense and his experts are going to come back and say why those experts, like, well, it could be that, but it's actually not 100% correct. And then it'll give the defense to maybe cross-examine, or maybe they already will cross-examine them, like the first time the experts for the state are up there, and say, is this 100%? Because I believe they did that, and I'm sure they did in Letitia's, but they did that in Murdoch's, where they kind of were, you know, honing in on the experts for the state and said, is this 100%? And like, it has such a high percentage of like accuracy that even though they have to say, no, it's not 100%, it's actually 99 point, you know what I mean? It's still something that the defense is going to kind of do to raise doubt, and the jury is going to have to either buy it or not. And I don't really see the jury buying that, you know, this was a regular thing, unless, like you said, the pattern can be laid out. But I just can't foresee 12 people thinking that that's a normal behavior.
I 100% agree.
According to the affidavit, from 4:50 a.m. to 5:26 a.m., Kohbgerger's phone movements show him allegedly moving south towards Genesee, Idaho, and west toward.
And also, like, people have said, why would you turn your phone off? You know, why would you be seen speeding away? Like, just at that time, like the time, and like I said earlier, the medical examiner is going to give it an even more accurate time of death, you know, and I'm hoping they'll elaborate a little bit more on this timeline aspect. But why, you know, would you speed away at this time of all times. You know what I mean?
Well, and exactly. And if it wasn't him, right? If it was somebody else, and this is what I say all the time when people think someone else other than Bryan did it, where are they? Did they drive an invisible car? You know, like, because if it's not him, then we would anticipate on this same footage to see another vehicle or another person on foot maybe come into play. So yes, all those factors, are they going to believe it? Especially if there's nothing else, like he is the only one seeing driving off, or his vehicle, things like that.
Right. It's like, what type of doubt could they raise at that point? We'll have to wait and see. And it's interesting also, like when we're thinking about how their previous filings said, you know, no connection to any of the victims. Like Bryan Kohbgerger has no connection to any of the victims. And we all were like, okay, so is there connection? Does that mean the roommates, are they included in that? Does that not include the roommates? So now we're thinking also about the previous, you know, whatever filing it was even prior to that, when they're talking about, we want Bethany to come to this prelim and we need her because she might have exculpatory evidence. So it's like, I can't help but think more and more like, so are they saying that like he was friends with somebody there? But at the same time, it's like you're stating he wasn't at the house. So obviously their argument isn't going to be like, well, he's friends with one of the surviving roommates. You know what I mean? So it's like, I guess that's not what they're saying. And how, besides other cameras and eyewitnesses, are they going to prove that? I mean, not that they have to prove it, but you know, what backup are they going to say? Because they need some sort of game with this alibi. You know, if they're going to elaborate, you know, how is it going to be elaborated on?
I have no idea. And that's the whole thing, is that with this case, it's just, you don't know what's coming. I really do. Like it, the PCA paints a picture, but with the state, with the defense's documents, they're painting two total opposite portraits. And that's what they're supposed to do, right? That, you know, the state's supposed to be depicting one way and defense is supposed to be depicting another way. But I feel like because there's such holes, things that don't add up, that everyone's really confused and we don't know what to expect. And I have a feeling we're going to be thrown a curveball. Now, I think it's going to add up to Bryan, but I still anticipate that we're going to get thrown a curveball in court.
I think so too. Like, and I don't think it has, I think the 911 call is going to be a bombshell, but at the same time, I don't think it's the curveball like we're like quoting right now. I think there's more and we're going to be stunned. And it's almost got me like nervous, like anxious, I guess you could say, because before the gag order, they asked Chief Fry, you know, when are we going to get to hear the 911 call? And he said, I believe it'll come out, but it might not come out till trial. At the same time, like they might not include it. Like, could the state like fight to have it, you know, heard or something? And they're like, okay, like, no, yeah. Like, could the judge say, yeah, we don't have to include it? Like, I don't know. It's making me wonder if like,
I never even thought of that.
So secret for so long. And then Chief Fry says it might come out at trial. And then now it's like, okay, well, would that be something that they would try to like still hide? You know, or not hide, I guess you could say, but not be transparent, like not reveal it to when we've all been wondering like what's going on with it.
I never even considered them not producing the 911 because I can't imagine, how do you not produce it? I rationalized that they have not released that 911 call because we do know multiple people spoke to that 911 dispatcher. It was not one of the surviving roommates, right? And so for the sake of witnesses' privacy, I think that on that 911 call, it was depicted exactly what that person witnessed as far as going into the crime scene, the way that the victims were found, and that even possible theories, right? Well, I saw this person last night or whatever. So there's way too much that's contained on that 911 call for them to release it when they're being this tight-lipped about it.
Yeah, like it might even explain like, or might talk about the university, like, oh, well, there was a frat party, or you know what I mean? Like it might say something that they're just like, everyone's like, I don't really want that. Or maybe like a business, you know what I mean? Like that they were at or something like that. And they're just like, maybe we shouldn't, because it doesn't really lead to anything valuable for the case. I don't know, for the public to know, maybe, I don't know. But Lamb's Bond asked, how long did he stalk them before the early morning hours of November 13th? And now this whole pinging at the house 12 times or whatever, what is the real quote for that, or the closest that you know about, his 12 pings or proof of him there 12 times? Because I'm like all mixed up about it, because it's been mishmashed so many ways. And British Chippy says, I don't think there's anything in the 911 call. And that could also be something that like we never even considered, which could be possible.
Yeah, I guess that's possible too. I mean, I think there's too much in the 911 call, but that's just me personally. But as far as I know, the only thing we know is that he had pinged in the area 12 times prior. And we know that he wasn't there for long. He had just moved there. So it's a pretty short amount of time that he would have been pinging there. But we don't know specifically. But again, pinging it's a tower that covers a decent radius. So it doesn't even mean that he had to be in Moscow, because we do know in the PCA, it also said he pinged from that tower, but they did not believe that he was in Moscow. Well, that doesn't mean his phone's just traveling. He could have been in the next town over, and that tower also provides coverage. So now if we're going based on what rumors and things we may have heard, and something from Steve as far as he was close enough to touch their Wi-Fi, but I don't go off of that. I go off of what we know for certain. So we heard he was close enough. I don't know where he's getting it from. That may be true. It may not be true. I don't know, though. I just know that he pinged in the area 12 times prior.
Right. And that's the one. I mean, I really do think that these pings for a PCA, it was enough. You know what I mean? For 12 jurors at trial, I 100% agree that like it would need, and I've seen this in other cases where they have the technological IT expert up there and all that, and the cast person go up on the stand, and it's very dull, boring conversations for someone like me. Yeah. For other techies, maybe they're tuning in that day, but hi, Alex Erickson. It's good to see you.
Hi,
but
Alex.
Some of the conversation when it comes to the digital forensics at trial, I just kind of tune out or fall asleep. But that's going to need to be laid out so accurately and in the best way for 12 jurors to see, because for the PCA, when there's an argument about like, well, he could have been here because this tower actually has this radius, like you're stating too, it's just that does leave way too much reasonable doubt. But when we're talking about the standards, it's much different, obviously, at trial, and that'll have to be on the state.
And that's what I'm saying, though, like, because people really take that PCA as if that's everything. And I'm like, when trial comes, this is what I meant by they're going to have thorough witnesses earlier, because they're going to have the people come on the stand, and it's going to be hours worth of, I don't want to say boring, because I don't want to sound insensitive, versus before they could even present you the data, they have to go through the entirety of the steps, how they got the data, what does it mean, what does it not mean, before then they present the part that you'll be interested in, because they have to show that it's credible. The same thing that we see with like the luminol and stuff. We have to have them on. We have to have them explain the entire process. What can it come up presumptive positive for? What can it not? And it's hours and hours of very detailed data. So, you can find it boring because, it's like, this isn't the information I'm really interested in. I just want to know what you ended up getting. But all of it's important to show that this is very thorough, and this isn't something that they're just pulling out of their booties. This is something that they're able to pinpoint.
Yeah. And when we're talking again about the alibi, the defense is saying we don't have anything right now to show you guys why he was out driving, but we might have it in the future. what's going on behind the scenes? Like, do they have like their little team like trying to get a hold of like places, or re-look at the CCTV footage that they have in the discovery and say like, wait, no, like he's actually here. Like, I'm just wondering like how much behind the scenes of like, we got nothing, like, do they have?
Well, I think that they're waiting to see how strong that eyewitness testimony is, because listen, if they could get Dylan to crack, and if they're for some reason able to get that DNA thrown out, right? And they're able to get Dylan to crack, and she doesn't know exactly who, because if we're going by bushy eyebrows, come on, that isn't going to hold up in court. And so I feel like they're going to push as far as what was the like, what did you really see and what was pushed on you? And if they could get her to crack, I feel like that's when they're going to go in and use that as the opportunity. That what made Bryan different than Joe Schmo? How do you know it was? Did you see Bryan or did you see another male? And that type of deal. So it's not. They're waiting to see how strong they are when they get on the stand.
I know, and it makes me so nervous for DM and BF, because I'm like, they're gonna be drilled, and like you said, like they're hoping maybe to trip them up or something like that. But like Riddler said, once again, if the state can place BK in the house, it'd be game over. And as far as we know right now, that the touch DNA for a lot of people. But what will the jurors know about touch DNA? Will that be enough for, let's say, which we don't know, but let's say that's all they have as far as placing him in the house. Not saying that that's true, because I believe that there's got to be something, even through the autopsy of 4 victims, like his hair or something, because we know he's got a lot of hair. But regardless, I just think that how are they going to place him in the house, basically? Because that's what 12 people would need.
We need something of him in that home, or something of theirs at his car, apartment, something. And I will be surprised if there's neither of them. If there's nothing of him, which I'm less surprised if there's nothing of Bryan or the killers in that home, because if he was covered head to toe with the magnitude of these killings up close and personal, like let's say if they even tried to scratch it, he's covered, the likelihood that anything would get to his skin is minimal, and it would have been quick. Okay. But I would be much more surprised if there is absolutely none, even the smallest amount of one of those 4 victims' DNA in his car, in his apartment, anywhere. That would surprise me.
Right. I agree. And like the Rockaways said, the defense obviously will put that BF or DM on the stand and say, did you take any hallucinogens or any other narcotics that night? Were you drunk? We know that they were out on the town separately, but out. Not only that, but according to DM, she's waking up in and out of sleep because of noises and whatnot. So like, are you usually groggy when you're, woken up and stuff like that? Like, what was your consciousness at that moment? Like, everything will be questioned. And it's very risky for the prosecution to put, I don't know, maybe that's another reason why they went the secret grand jury process, because they wanted more control, because they don't think that they were ready at that moment for like a prelim. I don't know.
Towards Uniontown, Washington. Kohbgerger may have taken a well-known back road called Thorn Creek Road at this point in his route towards his apartment. These are all very isolated roads, but Thorn Creek Road is known to be even more desolate. Police allege Kohbgerger eventually made his drive back into Pullman, Washington.
So she's saying that it's even more desolate out there, but yet they're able to kind of like track where he is. So that makes me think that this whole argument of, well, he might not have service in these areas, so how do we even know he shut it off? Which, of course, is a valid argument. At the same time, it's like, but these other places have, service for him and all that, and they're even more desolate. I mean, I trust Chanley Painter's reporting. So, and you can clearly see it's very rural.
From the quiet road of Johnson, where his vehicle was picked up on this security camera. The first time a camera captured his Hyundai after the murders were committed. By 5:30 a.m., police tracked the movements of Kohbgerger's cell phone and vehicle back to his apartment.
So there's the evidence that prosecutors say they have, right? Tracking the white Hyundai Elantra, and his alibi is that he's out for a drive that night. What does this mean? Let's bring the think tank. Join us tonight in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy. Also with us in Phoenix, Arizona, the attorney who represented Jodi Arias, Kirk Nurmi, and in Washington, D.C., the attorney who represented Johnny Depp in his defamation case, won the case, and fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, Ben Chu, is with us. And before I ask a question, Ben, I mean, Kirk, you and Ben are going at it with the jackets tonight. Amazing job. Amazing job.
Right. We can step it up, Vinny.
Exactly. All right. Let me start with Eklund Mercy, though. Eklund, this is this an alibi or an admission? If your alibi is putting yourself in the white Hyundai Elantra, and that's how they track down this killer through the videos and the cell phone in the.
That's sort of how I interpreted it, like right away when I read that it was like routine. It was almost like he's admitting like that, oh, yep, that's my car. Like no argument with CCTV footage, like at all. Like pretty much saying like whatever you guys have so far, like, yep, that's me.
That's how I took it as. But like I said, a lot of people are like, where does it acknowledge it's his car? Well, it doesn't say, yep, that's me. But it kind of does without saying, yep, it's me. You know, it's, yes, I'm acknowledging that I was driving around. No, I can't say definitively that I wasn't in the area at that time. So it's accounting for being caught on footage.
Yeah. And it said he was by himself too. Like not only was it him, but he's by himself. We're throwing that out there. Like, it's not like they went with the argument that he was at home sleeping and somebody had borrowed his car. You know what I mean? So it's just interesting that like they point blank said, like, I'm driving around. What you see is what you get. And I know you guys have footage of me driving. Like, yeah, that's me. But I wasn't at that house during the time that you guys are saying the crimes took place. But I can't back that up right now. I might be able to back it up like down the road when we get to trial by either going on the stand, which I don't think that they would do that, or I'm going to cross-examine your witnesses, which we know it's going to be probably either the experts in like the technological stuff and the phone with car info too, or it's going to be the surviving roommates. So it's just, I feel like I can't foresee them putting him up on the stand, but they're leaving that door open, obviously, and everyone has that door open.
And it's smart to leave that door open. You don't know, right? So they're not going to say that we're going to put him on the stand, but we also can't say definitively that we won't go on the stand. It all depends.
Yeah, and I watched a Bryan Enton segment, and he was basically asking that defense lawyer, do you think that the defense team and Ann here was annoyed that they weren't able to do their cross-examination and all that during the prelim? And they kind of had like a laugh about it, like, oh, I'm sure it wasn't like, they probably prepare for these things, but of course it wasn't ideal for them because they wanted BF up there. So it's just interesting how, they really have been going hard with their subliminal messages through these court filings because of the gag order. And it's like, once you get to trial though, are you able to back up everything? That still is left open because she's not going to lie in these court filings, but at the same time, the verbiage used, which we both agree on, is used that way so that they can leave that door open to, say like, well, we didn't say it was 100%.
Exactly.
The car moving with the car, then the cell phone's turned off, and then the car is seen at the scene, then speeding away. What's going on here?
This is one of those cases in which it's hurry up and prove it prosecution. You want the prosecution to prove their case. They're having to, carry their burden. the officers did a great job with being very detailed, and the prosecutor was being very detailed in the timing and literally setting it up for an alibi. So if he doesn't give one, the only thing that he can do is literally poke holes in the prosecution's argument. They did a really good job of actually placing the car. Now it's going to be, literally, they probably did not give him an offer. So there's no pleading in this case. So the only option is to go to trial. At this point, you just force the prosecution to prove their burden.
So Kirk, I mean, am I missing something here? If your alibi puts you in the white Hyundai Elantra, and it's the white Hyundai Elantra that's like circling around the crime scene and speeding away from the crime scene, is this really an alibi that I was going for a drive by myself to no specific location at no specific time with no specific independent witnesses?
No, you know, as I was reading along there, I said this is more of an admission than an alibi. And it made me, you know, look, the responsibility of a criminal defense attorney in a capital case, they're immense and intense. But the number one goal of that criminal defense attorney in that representation of death penalty case is to preserve their client's life. And I don't see how this does that. This doesn't really constitute an alibi to me. It's more of an admission that some of the state's evidence is accurate. It doesn't really make any sense to me. So, you know, if their focus.
And see, this lawyer interpreted it the same way we did. Like, yeah, it's not so much an alibi. He's just saying, like, well, what you have of me is true. But, you know, I can't give you any more because you guys took this route. Like, they're blaming the state in these documents, too, for, like, why things are the way they are. And this is as much as I can give you because you guys did this secret grand jury. I wasn't able to cross-examine people, but in the future, I might be able to. So it's just very, I don't know. I find it interesting the way that they're able to do this stuff. And it's all legal, of course.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he said it so much better than, because that's what I was thinking. It feels more like an admission than an alibi. And that was perfectly said because that's what it is. It's I've seen so many people, because I love hearing people who don't think Bryan did it, you know, and all of their arguments. And it's like, now, like, I like to hear, well, how do you feel after hearing this alibi? And I hear some people say, well, honestly, like, I feel like, oh crap, like now I'm more leaning towards he might have did this. And then you have some people who are like, no, I still feel the same way. But I think that it really is more of admitting that, yes, according to the PCA, that is my vehicle, than it is, nope, that wasn't me anywhere near it.
Yeah. And at this point, I do think that everything that they have so far and that we know so far is pointing towards his guilt. I do want to know like more detail, obviously, because they're saying like we can elaborate more, but not at this time. So it's just interesting that like this was enough, I guess, for it to be filed and go through, and whatever else happens is gonna, you know, we'll have to wait and see. But
I think it's smart, you know, we're not going to give anything until we have to give anything. And the little nuggets that we are getting, again, paint this picture that, oh, is it possible that Bryan didn't do this? You know, like what's going on? And that's the whole goal, is to create that reasonable doubt. That's all they have to do.
Yeah. And it really might not have anything to do with, because they gave multiple reasons why they could elaborate more later. Him testify, cross-examining of experts, and cross-examining of witnesses that the state has. And it's like, well, it might not have anything to do with the witnesses really, but they're throwing it out there as like, well, we want to cross-examine some witnesses of yours to back this up. And it's when really they know like, well, we don't have really anything to kind of prove that you weren't there. Or what if it's the opposite? What if there really is something that could back up some sort of alibi? They're claiming like they might have it in the future. So it's just interesting that they think they're going to get it at trial maybe, or it's just kind of tactic.
Should be on things that save his life, and things like this, these partial admissions, they just go further because you extrapolate this out and say he's got this habit of doing this. Well, the state can come back and say, look, he was stalking, he was praying, he was looking for victims, he found the victim. This makes it look all the worse in terms of the preservation of his life when you get to that sentencing phase. So to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense what's going on here for Mr. Kohbgerger's attorneys.
Yeah, Ben, Kirk makes a great point here, talking about has a long habit of going for drives. yeah, all the drives that were done driving around and near the scene of the mass murder, before the mass murder, seems to prove premeditation and planning more than, hey, I just go for drives.
Yeah, Vinny, it reminds me of that expression, I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. I mean, this seems to be a non-alibi alibi.
A non-alibi alibi.
I love that
I
because
know.
it's so true.
It really is. And but at the same time, so when we're talking about the pings and we are both on the same page that like the radius for that like is kind of wide, you know. Well, will the jury interpret that as well, or are they just going to say like, nope, we've seen it, it's laid out as you were stalking and preying on them, you know what I mean? So it's just interesting to kind of wait and see, like, are they going to scrutinize it the way we do, where we're like, because we've had so much time, you know, we're under the assumption these 12 people haven't been exposed to this case, you know, in the media and all that, because that's what
Wait,
is going to
it's
have to be.
possible though, because I was really surprised during the Lori Vallow case when the juror spoke out, and he explained that he had followed the case a little bit. He knew about the case, like he knew it was Lori when she first walked in. He didn't know that that's what he was being called for, and that his wife really kind of was into the true crime aspect of it and followed the case. And I was like, wow, I didn't really realize that you can be that familiar with it. You just have to not be biased. But I don't know how you cannot be biased, even if you kind of heard about it. Whatever you hear initially is going to inform your opinion.
Yeah, and I might be stupid for asking this, but I feel like in certain jurors, especially because it's going to be kind of, they have to find people who haven't been overly exposed, but also are going to be for the DP.
Yes.
So
it's going to be very hard.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm wondering if in certain cases they kind of talk it over, both the defense and the prosecution, on like selecting a juror for either side and say like, well, this is what they've said, you know, or how does that work? Like if they say like, because they have to disclose that, I'm sure.
Yes.
So
but then again, they only have a certain amount of jurors that each side can scratch, you know, and say, no, we don't want them. So eventually you're going to get stuck with who you're stuck with.
Right. So this next little clips I want to play are just from the documentary that I did. And I just want to go through pretty much what it stated in the PCA, just to have it in this live stream and recap what they're stating the movements of Bryan was that night, just to go through it again. So again, thank you for being here on panel with me, and everyone in chat. If you haven't hit like, please do so. And if I could get mods to drop Melissa's channel again, that'd be great.
Was able to get a pretty good timeline on Haley and Maddie the night of, shortly before 3 a.m.
Reading directly from the affidavit, we know this. DM and BF both made statements during interviews that indicated the occupants of the King Road residence were at home by 2 a.m. and asleep, or at least in their rooms by approximately 4 a.m. This is with the exception of Kernodle, who received a DoorDash order at the residence at approximately 4 a.m. Suspect Vehicle 1 can be seen entering the area a fourth time at approximately 4:04 a.m. It can be seen driving eastbound on King Road, stopping and turning around in front of 500 Queen Road, number 52, and then driving back westbound on King Road. When Suspect Vehicle 1 is in front of the King Road residence, it appeared it unsuccessfully attempted to park or turn around in the road. The vehicle then continued to the intersection of Queen Road and King Road, where it can be seen completing a 3-point turn and then driving eastbound again down Queen Road.
The Latah County coroners conducted autopsies, and detectives have been provided with the results of those autopsies. We know that the autopsies confirmed the identity of the 4 victims, determined the cause and manner of death as a homicide by stabbing, and determined that it was likely all 4 victims who were asleep during the attack. Some of the victims had defensive wounds, and each victim was stabbed multiple times.
This was a brutal weapon.
So I just wanted to, again, that's the interpretation of according to the PCA and according to that digital artist, that was their interpretation of it. So the visuals might not be, 100% until we find out till trial, but I feel like they have stated that he came in and left out the back door.
Mm-hmm. And if we're going by what Chrissy expressed to somebody that they speak to, which again, I say take everything with a grain of salt. That doesn't mean that the families are lying or anything, versus just take anything that hasn't been verified with a grain of salt. But they believe that the same, that he had come in through the back slider door and also left through that back slider door, but left the slider door open, which would make so much sense as far as why we don't see any blood transfer, because that always bothered me. Is that doesn't mean that there isn't there, but at least in all of the really high resolution photos that we've seen, that there wasn't any type of blood transfer. And if he grabbed onto that slider to open or shut it, that's what I would anticipate seeing. But it would make sense if when he entered, he did not shut that door behind him, nor when he left did he shut it behind him.
And Chief Fry says the door was wide open when we got there. So never stated which door. It definitely could be the back door. Absolutely. The slider door, I should specify. But let me just look over my notes because I don't want to go on too long, but I know that there were other things I wanted to touch on. No visuals. I'm going to go through. I think I want to dig deeper into other things on a different stream, like regarding what we know about Bryan. But I do want to kind of dig a little bit into statements that were kind of being said about him early on. Do you remember how he had gone to see like a doctor and it was like a physical or something? So I'm very curious, obviously, about that visit. They stated it was like routine or whatever, or I think like they kind of downplayed that visit, I feel. But I'm curious about it. Like, why?
Sorry.
No, you're good. Go on.
A lot of people use that as a way to see he didn't have any marks on him or anything. I don't know about you, but I go to the doctors a lot, and you do your weight, you do your blood pressure, you do your discussion. The only part of my body that's usually seen in a physical is when I roll up my sleeve to get the blood the blood pressure cuff on. So I don't really put too much weight into, if he had gone to the doctors right after and if he had marks all over him, that doctor would have known. I don't believe that. It all depends on what physically was being done.
Right, because on that note, if it was just a conversation about mental health, I mean, she really wouldn't need to do anything besides put the stethoscope on his shirt or under his shirt. So it's interesting also because, so let's say, because we have to say he's a criminology major getting his PhD. There's things he knows about true crime because of the professor that he studied under. Those things we know as a fact. So is he smart enough, or I don't know if you want to call it that, but strategic enough or whatever to realize, like, should I have on record that I was having mental problems? Like, because I'm just thinking, like you said, it might not have anything to do with physical stuff where the doctor would have seen cuts. Because he had said, or the doctor's office had stated, like, oh, even our doctor was commenting about how polite that gentleman was, or something like under the emphasis of like, yeah, he was so nice. And so it's like, what type of conversation did they have where maybe the doctor was feeling like, oh, poor guy, or you know what I mean? Or
I
like,
think that's really interesting.
Again, it's speculation, but it would lead me to wonder more about like what exactly was said during that doctor visit, if it had anything to do with either cuts or mental status and what type of game he's playing, because I don't know.
Well, because we're always depicted two very different types of Bryan, and all of it we don't know for certain. where depicted this really bad, bad criminal who drove his own car with his own phone and left the sheath behind. But then we're also painted the portrait of this really educated student who studied this and really mimicked the behavior of these serial killers. And would he be smart enough to go to the doctor? Maybe he scheduled ahead of time too. If he pre-planned these murders, and I would love to know, was it routine? Was it at the request of the doctor? Or is it something that he took the time and scheduled ahead of time, knowing what he was going to do? I don't know, but I never really thought of it from that aspect. And I'm interested in that. That's a really good point.
But the problem is that's protected under HIPAA, I'm assuming. So how would we ever even, could this defense expand on that? Like, they would probably have to say like he's mentally ill, or I don't know. I'm just curious if that would ever come out. And
it depends on if he signs his waive, like if okay, same thing with like Letitia with her mental health, except she didn't have any, but like they had these doctors come out, and testify, yes, I had this exchange with her, but that was for her own defense. And so he would have had to sign over. Now, I think they're able to confirm that he did indeed go to this doctor at this time, and maybe the context as far as the appointment, but anything specifics like doctor notes or results or anything like that, I don't know. But that's something I want to look into more, because that's a really good point.
Because then if, let's say he was there for like to have on record, like, well, I was suffering, I reached out, for help. I was trying to get help. Obviously it's after the fact, so it can be like interpreted like, no, you're just trying, like we're stating, like to make it seem like you had problems, it's like you just don't know his intentions, if that's the route. Not saying it is, but again, we have chat saying like he's not smart enough. And like you said, we've been given two visions of him, like that he's dumb enough to walk and leave an eyewitness like DM. And then we've also had he's, he premeditated a lot of this, and he had cameras set up in his neighbors or whatever it was, a coworker or whatever.
Right. He was able to kill 4 people ninja style, in such a short time period. Yeah, exactly.
And the thing is too, I'm wondering if it was something where it was like, I want on record, like to say I was having mental problems at the time. Could he release that information? Because it's protected under HIPAA, but if it was part of their defense, and again, they don't have to like prove anything, but it'd be interesting if what all that meant. Or maybe his defense team is saying like, no, we're not going that route.
Yeah. Well, I know if he waives it, because same thing with Letitia, because she had that one lady on the stand, and it worked against her actually, because they were trying to prove this mental health crisis. And she was like, she came to me after a referral, and it was very routine, like these were my notes. They had copy of the notes and everything. And she was able to get into complete detail, even though it wasn't much. But that's because defense brought her on as their witness. So I'm curious to know what the rules are if prosecution wanted that information.
Yeah, and Lamb's Bond says, hospital records are subpoenaed all the time. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, if that was a route that the defense or the state is going to take, they'll take the means to do that. And also, just another thing I wanted to touch on before we end the stream, his one neighbor stating that, his one friend that said that they used to like to go on runs at night, that doesn't really back up the theory that he likes to go on night drives in a way. Because people have been pointing that out. Like, he goes on night runs. It's like, yeah. And he also had a neighbor that said that he could hear the dish disposal
vacuuming and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, that still doesn't back up him saying like, this is a routine thing that I'm driving around. Like, no, you have to show us, the pattern. Well, I guess they don't have to show anything, but it would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or, they're just going to argue whatever the state's witnesses and experts are going to say. So now we're going to have to wait and see all that. But I thought it was interesting to get a little bit more information this week with the gag order through this stuff, and these filings giving us a sneak peek at what's to come possibly. And hello, Sleuthy Goosey. It's good to see you.
Hey, Sleuthy.
And Johnny, it's good to see you. And everyone else who joined, thank you so much for being here, guys. Time flies when we're talking these cases. So it's always an interesting conversation with you on panel and at your channel. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me, Amber. It's always lovely being on panel with you and hearing your thoughts.
I'm excited for your live stream tomorrow night about Watts. I'm like, I can never escape the case. So
I came into the YouTube live stream community from the Watts, and so like for real, like I didn't know people could talk on YouTube, like, and so I remember I came here and I was like, oh my god, people are interacting. I'm like, oh, and so I fell down deep with that case, and I cannot believe it's about to be the 5-year anniversary. But it's one of those that, just like this case, I can imagine years on, like, still wanting to discuss it. I could sit there and discuss Watts all day too. I had to pull myself off that island. I got stranded there.
I know, and it always, and that's the thing is like 5 years. It's like for the family, it probably feels like forever and like an eternity without them. And but 5 years is half a decade. I think about it as like, wow, like that. The victims do leave an imprint on like our hearts and our minds. I feel like it's going to be interesting to see this Idahofour case play out. And I know people are still whispering that he could still sign a plea deal, and we can't put that off the table, right?
I think that might be a possibility, as he could do that right as trial's about to hit.
And it could be the same thing that they did in Colorado, and they used the enticement of, we'll take off DP off the table. You won't face the firing squad or have to ever worry about that. So it's like, whatever's best for, I guess, the victims' families. I mean, I will say that in the Watts case, that's what the families wanted. They wanted a plea deal. So that's what it is. But I feel like, just speaking candidly, I feel like the plea deal, and even in the case, the staircase case with Peterson, Michael Peterson, that was a plea deal also. And I feel like Lee still has a lot of mystery behind it, because there wasn't that trial that lays out the evidence and experts for both sides, and where you can kind of process it and really, see it for how it is, or, beyond a reasonable doubt, hopefully. So it's like, I guess if that's what the families would want, then of course, like, I'm for it in the Idaho case. I just feel like sometimes it doesn't close the door.
It doesn't. You don't, for the family's sake, like a trial, I know we all want answers, but trial is brutal. It's brutal for those families there. And what's hard with this particularly is that there isn't just one victim's family. So one victim's family might feel one way, and another victim's family may feel complete opposite. And what's hard is the likelihood that all 4 families are going to be in agreement with how they want. And so far, we could see that it seems like they're handling it very differently. And so with a trial, you get the answers, but it's extremely, I can imagine how horrific it must be to go through, to live look at it with Gannon, like what the family had to go through. It's horrific, even the surviving roommates, everything. But at the same time, if you get a plea deal, you're never going to get those answers. And there's always going to be that what if. And in a case like this, I feel like that would be very, I don't know what word to use, but it's already such a popular case. There's already such speculation and conspiracy surrounding it. I think it would be dangerous not to get those answers and to get like just a closed door. That's it. We're never going to know.
And without naming the names of the families, I think we all can kind of figure like which one or which ones possibly would lean more like, just, shut it down. I don't want to go through this trial process. It's not going to change things. It's not going to bring things back. take DP off the table. I'm good with that. And let's move on. And like, I can totally support that and see that stance. But I do think that I don't know, the trial brings so much closure. And, you know, some countries, and I don't know if all of them, but I know a lot of countries don't even have plea deals.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because like I only know that because of the Watts case, and obviously comments and just, you know, people from around the world watch and follow that research that so many channels have done. And I seen Derek asked if I was doing a live stream. Melissa's doing a live on it, and I might join you.
I would love that. I would love that.
And she invited me for, in case people think I'm just like,
yes. No, I asked.
And I will join.
It would be okay even if you asked, like if you invited yourself, but I would love that, seriously.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's crazy because that case just like you said, brought us kind of to this community. And like I've met the nicest people based off of just us all wanting to research and kind of understand these crimes. It's a lot more than just trials. It's a lot of like studying psychology and actually like freshening up on like the fact that every state is different. You know what I mean? Like here it's the DP leverage that Idaho has. I think I wouldn't be surprised if there was a plea deal and they'd take that off the table.
Mm-hmm.
Because Anne is working her butt off, and like she's like you said, like everything they're doing, it seems pretty justified. Like some of it might be a little bit of like courtroom semantics and drama, but it's all like, wouldn't you kind of, if you're not able to go on mainstream media and like even their local media, they can't go out and like talk to a paper or an article place or any local and say like, well, we just don't think that there's any connection to Bryan and these victims. Like they're not able to verbalize that like through, which I guess can be good and bad. Actually, I seen a poll the other day. It was like, do you agree with gag orders? And it was like most of them, or no, it was, do you agree with cameras in the courtroom or something like that? And it was like, the majority said it didn't matter either way. Like it was like, yes, I think it's more fair. And then it was like, no, I don't think it's fair. And then, but the majority said that they didn't think it mattered either way. I thought that was interesting because like, I don't think it does matter either way because we've seen cases that were aired and we all watched it, like Casey Anthony, and we've seen how that outcome took place. And then we've also seen cases where everything's been kind of like not, you don't see cameras, and I don't know. It's like, I don't think it really matters personally.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it's aired because like with Letitia, God, I never anticipated that much. It felt like you were in the courtroom, that there was nothing that was, you know, I don't know what word to use. Like it wasn't, it felt like you were there. And then with Vallow, which I followed that case just as deep, the preliminary was great. And then maybe it's because it happened at the same time Letitia's too, so it was just too much to keep up with. But at the end of the night, all we had was like all of these hours with no visual, and I'm a visual learner. So I'm like, it's just not the same, you know? I can't retain the information the same as a viewer either, like, unless I'm watching, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I totally see that. And like, Lamb's Bond said, televise everything so people learn about the process. Can I just say that is, I really think that would be something that this particular community, because I feel like I've stated in your chat before that this case brought people to true crime communities that have never followed like a true crime case, like all the way to trial, have never seen like a case with a plea deal. Like, so you can compare like the process. So like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously we've all been introduced at some point, you know what I mean?
But when I get frustrated when they say how wrong or you know, this is unusual with this PCA or with this, and it's like, have you read one before? You know, like, or look at these states' motions, you know, or look at this defense motions, and it's like, some things can be unusual, absolutely, but not all. And some of the things people are pointing out, it's like, if you've followed cases and if you followed the process, I don't think you would think it's super unusual.
Right. And Delaney brings up a good point. Like all the body cam footage, like even in Letitia's, like how the visual wasn't that great. Seeing the interviews and the body cam, that obviously helped a lot. Even in Watt's case, like we were able to get a lot of information.
Oh yeah.
But still, then that's the thing too, is like we're in the process right now, how we were saying how everyone interprets the information differently, even though we're all given the same information. That's the same with the Watts case, is like we're all given this stuff, but we've all like interpreted it and dissected it and all that. Like I just feel like that tends to happen more so with cases that end in plea deals. So it'd be helpful if, you know, we could get a lot more answers, I guess. And like, because it ends in plea deal, what if we never even get like the 911 call?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I 100% agree.
Not that we're entitled to it, but like we're curious.
Yep.
But yeah, it's just a process, obviously, and we're going to wait and see how it all plays out. Hopefully it's in the favor of what, you know, the families want. And again, it's very complex here. 4 victims, 4 families. Some of the families are divorced families. So it's like, what if one side of the like mom and dad, like stepdad or whatever, wanted it one way and like the other half of the family wants it the other way? Not saying that's the case. It's just very complex.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I just want them. I don't think you could ever have peace. I can't imagine you could ever have peace or that feeling of closure, but I hope that they can at some point get to the place where they feel, I don't know what word to even use. Like content doesn't suffice. Like there's no word that suffice, but I hope that they could get to the point where they feel comfortable with the answer or the outcome and can do their best to move forward the best that they possibly can.
Yeah. Like we saw Larry and Kate, you know, with the whole sentencing, and we just, I personally, my opinion is just my perception. You could tell like weight was lifted off their shoulders, how they were talking, how they were walking. Like, it's just kind of like, and again, I'm not speaking for them or for any of the victims' families, but like, it just seems like even though they never will 100% get peace, it seems like there is just like peace and justice, at least a little bit.
Now that's a strong couple. They're a very strong couple.
I know. It's amazing, that whole case and everything that took place, and to watch that case, I feel like much like the Murdaugh, which I wasn't as deep into the Murdaugh as I was Lori. But when Murdaugh, it was kind of like, now when I hear about him, like, I don't care. Like, same with Letitia. Like, I'm just like, they can go rot. Like, we went through everything. There was a process. It was fair and just. Like, just go away.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
So I'm hoping that everything plays out that same way for this case, and everything kind of, we can conclude it. Because I was thinking today, I'm like, I want to talk about this alibi stuff, but I'm like, are people bored with talking about it? Like at this point?
I don't think so. And it's the weirdest thing, because I even question myself. I'm like, holy crap, Melissa, like I've talked about this so much, yet I don't get tired of talking about it. But I also know why, at least for me personally, because I've always been intrigued by unsolved or unexplainable. I'm not saying this is unexplainable, but there's something that doesn't add up. So for me personally, I'll keep running around in that circle, trying to figure out something that makes sense. And I think that's what keeps me going with this case. Is so far, I can't figure out even a theory that makes complete sense based on what we know. You know, that may all change once we get information. But every theory I've gone through, and so many already, it's like nothing adds up perfectly yet. And so I feel like I can't walk away with that. And that's what I hope that the family doesn't ever, I wish that they never have to experience that. Like, I want them to feel that sense of closure of nothing bothering them or nagging them, you know, because if that nags and I'm just an outsider, you know, could you imagine that for a family member? I don't want to imagine. And so that's what I meant by, I hope they get as close to a sense of peace and closure as they can.
Right. I agree. And just, you know, and I'm starting to think about how they've spoken about how it was a targeted attack, right? And like that in itself is a whole rabbit hole, but you know, they never said, did they ever say, I guess I should question that and not state it as a fact, but did they ever say that we believe somebody was the target, or did they just keep saying it was a targeted attack?
As far as I remember, they went from we believe it was targeted to it wasn't targeted to the house was targeted. That's all I remember. I don't remember them ever. Now, if you're asking as far as like the family and stuff, there's different, you know, things that have been said. But as far as like press conferences, it went from we believe it was targeted to not being targeted to the house possibly being targeted.
Right. It has been all over the place, that one aspect. And it's like, you know, they never really did specify, you know, who the target was. And now we're going to be getting up to the trial, and like they technically don't have to. Like whatever they lay out just has to be enough for the jurors to deal with, you know what I mean? And weigh out. Like they don't really have to go further than stating like, well, the house was targeted. Like he had vendetta against this house.
Right.
So it's just interesting to me because like, I'm like, wait, I thought that, because I want to know like was any collateral damage? And that's, you know, I hate to state it that way, but I'm just wondering if like, you know, was it the house or I'm just confused by that whole, like it was targeted and not, and all that.
Well, there was a few inconsistencies that they stated, because the closest you'll get to the truth is if you go back to the beginning and listen to what they said, you know, like as time goes on, things get muddier and muddier. And so when I rewatched the press conferences from the beginning, it was very telling because it's like, ooh, listen to how they're saying. I think you should do a stream specifically going back to the beginning because it's really, really interesting hearing what they say then when you know what you know now.
Yeah, that would be something to kind of go back through, because I'm like, just like the other trials we've followed, you know, while they're releasing the body cam stuff and the interviews during trial, the public's getting that.
Yeah.
So we're all going to want to go back to before the arrest, you know, after the arrest, like the main bullet points of the documents, etc. Because the gag order takes place very early on in all this. So it's like hard to, and then everything that comes out at trial, we're obviously all going to go through like very meticulously. I can already foresee, you know, unless we're hopeful for stuff that we're actually not going to see.
Yeah, it's possible. Guess
But
we'll tell what time.
Yep. And October is coming up. And so again, I stated it earlier in chat, I believe his next court date that he'll be in court is August 18th, I think.
I think so, yes.
Okay. So, all right. Yeah, August 18th back in court. Thank you again. Thank you, mods. Thank you, everyone who listened, and replay viewers. If everyone could thumbs up and subscribe to Melissa Jade, we will all be talking very soon, I'm sure.
You're so sweet. Thank you so much for having me on, Amber. I really appreciate it.
No problem. We'll talk soon. And
Okay.
bye, everybody.
Bye.